Everyone, sorry I forgot to turn that off while Felix and I were talking here. I'm hoping that everyone is seeing something that says Design for Tri-Rail TOD. And so what I'm going to do today is there's going to be 3 fast presentations that discuss one, the work that Tony Abate did for how to design for subtropical and tropical cities. That's this presentation. I used his work to develop this assignment for students in 2005, I think. But it goes through all the ways that between Tony's work and me trying to find better illustrations of them, that how to design a city in a subtropical climate. I think that every student should have to learn this. Maybe even every semester get reviewed on all the methodologies in which to be successful in a subtropical climate to keep humans as comfortable as possible and to reduce the energy load on all our cities. The second item will be also go very fast through Brisbane, Australia, in which you will see they have really instituted a lot of those design ideas, and you'll see them executed in Brisbane. Brisbane is one of the cities in the world which has pretty much an identical climate to South Florida. And then finally, you're going to see the work that I did in 2009 in Times Square, when Times Square changed. The mayor of New York and the city, the director of public works, they closed Broadway in Times Square and started building them into pedestrian plazas. And so you'll see that transformation, which happened on many intersections throughout the Broadway extension in the city, which was a very radical idea, not quite as radical as trying to charge people for driving through Manhattan, which they're doing now, but it had never happened before. So let's start with tri-rail design. And let's see if I can, well, maybe not. Okay, there we go. So these are the basic basic concepts in which to make a successful outdoor spaces work. One is a sequence of microclimates. You're thinking about the city not as a single blanket. You're thinking about the city as a series of microclimates where some areas get hotter and some are cooler. But you design and think about how do you make a little microclimate, and that can be just an arcade, it can be a little park space, it can be many things to make a little cooler zone within the city. Because we live in the tropics and not in a hot and arid desert, you have to keep the wind moving all the time. If there's any breeze, any energy, you need to keep it moving. So in order to do that, you need to not block the continuous transition of air. Air needs to have a place to go. If it dead ends into a cul-de-sac, let's say a cul-de-sac of building, then it will cease to exist. The breeze will die. That in terms of walking in the city, you must shade the pathways. You've got to find a way to do that at a certain percentage. You need to target the bright light. So that means you live in a tropical environment. You shouldn't just try to block out all the sunlight, right? You should be targeting the bright light. So you still have the instinct of the bright light in the city, but it's the shaded pathways and other things are giving the pedestrian a private attribute. I mean, a comfortable place to walk. Of course, you have to protect heavy mass services from solar gain and whatever tricks you can imagine to do that. For this particular exercise, I set as a goal a 40% vegetative cover. So that can be, green roofs plus trees on the street, whatever that is, in order to get to 40%. That was my just estimate. And that has been used in other designs. And then finally, you need to shade for the time of day. So, when people are walking into work at 8 o'clock in the morning, what is the sun and heat situation at that particular time of day? What is it like at noon when they go out? What is it like on the evening? So you are in fact, you're not dealing with shade and the sun just as also a generic attribute, but you're saying to yourself, okay, when does the shade happen? And even the shade, you can, of course, go to the next level too, and recognize that there's also shade versus time of year in terms of things. So it's always particular. It's not just generic. These, I'm just going to go through these. They don't really, these are really part of the assignment, which was to teach people how to follow rules in general. So I will just kind of go through those, and then you'll see these are principles that both, as I said, come from maybe Tony's guidelines, but I may have stolen images that relate to them. So basically, both in terms of wind flow, in terms of the whole city, the wind should flow at the kind of diagonal of the grid of the city. That's the best generic role for the city. Here's, of course, our diagrams here for us. And then in relationship to these wind things, you have these different street scales. So each of those street scales have different impacts in terms of whether the wind can go down them as a broad street or whether it can jump over the buildings, right? So each of them, think about those different cityscapes. So this one's much more easier for the wind to travel and to jump over the buildings, maybe in a courtyard before, than if you have this kind of higher level and constrained circumstance. There should be the Hawaiian guidebook also showed coming on the diagonal. So this is the same thing on the diagonal, seems to work best as a general plan. In this case, whenever you can, and thinking about that, how do you get the air that's coming into an urban environment to cross either water or a park, because it reduces the temperature of that air as it comes into the city? How do you create what I call breeze channels? So these are green spaces that go through the city, right? That then are driving the breeze quickly through the city, but also at a cooler temperature. Here's multiple. This is Chandigarh by Le Corbusier, where you can see multiple breeze channels, both north and south, that are green, and then broken and down in terms of street access on the grid coming in from east and west. These were designed by a great architectural critic and architect, Michael Sorkin, in which you see that he's really, it's almost like he's shaping the city itself to guide the breeze through the city. The breeze channels, you don't have to think of them again generically. So this is in Japan. So the breeze can both, you want it down where people are, so you can think about more blocking the breeze above and less blocking it below. Abate was very thought that the best way to build buildings within the tropical city is to build them as podiums. So, you know, it's kind of simple. You have the parking and stores at the first floor, but there is, in fact, second story public space. And that second story public space, or third floor or fourth story, is very likely to have better cooling conditions, right? And more breeze than is possible. It also allows, within a tighter block, for you to have cross ventilation within a unit, because you're not making a really thick building, say with a corridor down the center, an apartment building, and then a whole apartments on either side of that corridor, which prohibits all cross ventilation really, unless you talk to your neighbor quite frequently. So that kind of thinking helps both with the building and with moving the air through the city. In this particular design, the idea was, which is happening a lot in form-based design anyway, this was a height would be like 35 feet. And there were rules for that in terms of maintaining it. And there had to be, there could be setbacks in order for the air, if you needed the air, you thought the air needed to move forward more, but there had to be a continuous idea of the street. But in also that what has to happen in terms of the form, this picture from Havana, in which you can see the balcony above also providing street light down below, shade down below. If you look at nomadis architects, you can see the way that in Caracas that they created this idea of, you can see the air going over and under in terms of transferring itself through the space. And so that, especially here in Caracas, where you see those kind of empty spaces, so it's also how do you make breezeways? How are you thinking that the air goes under the building to get to back spaces? How does it do that? How does it then flow up? Does the tree help that happening in terms of ventilating up also? This is a design by Carlos Leite from Sao Paulo, in which you see really a kind of like positive view about how a city might be built. In other words, that the Corbusier Tower in the park might function very well in an urban environment because the air can then has lots of space around each of the buildings and the air can move freely throughout the space, which is why Moscow has got to be the stupidest design of all time for a cold climate, because the wind just pounds down this avenue, right? And it just sweeps into these buildings. So whereas this would be an amazing building for a subtropical climate, it is not the appropriate building for a cold climate where you want to restrict the free flow of movement in order to maintain the heat within the city itself. I'm going to pass over these, but these are this is the development of microclimates. So you start to see these tiny parks, these other small areas where you can feel comfortable and cool for a short period of time as you transfer the city. And so these can help with the general cooling of the environment, not as much as a giant park or river where the wind's blowing across, but you can cool down the zone, which then also leads to cooler area on both sides. You can have, and these off-street courts, very much exist. Here's some in Hollywood. And also if your city and wind is on a diagonal, these have a way, they help the wind flowing on that diagonal and keep it moving through the city. It's very popular to have these in Dhaka, which is another one of our sister subtropical cities, Dhaka, Bangladesh. There are a few on here. You'll see those relationships, those particular places. And here it's a, kind of a market. This is the 40% vegetative climate, which they did do in Brisbane, Australia, and a particular residential development. Of course, you have to know your trees. You have to know what they do, what kind of shade they make, how they block the wind, how they let the wind come through. Here are some examples of vegetation. One in New Delhi with the green roof, one in Miami, which I assume you all have seen with the green facade garage in Miami Beach. Of course, you can do green facades. And then it's to really think about, and so this is in Brisbane. So here, this is a public space related to the city complex for the city administration and legislative activities. And so the way the building's set up, they end up shading the entire space, right? Which is successful in a tropical, subtropical environment. It's not maybe the way you would design things in New York City or Boston or London, where you want that sunshine coming in. But you still need to have the bright light because people appreciate that bright light. And it doesn't have to be covered like this 100%. But if you think about the way you're setting up the buildings, you might in fact have a way to provide a continuous shade just from the building itself or a moving shade across the plaza. This is the one on the upper right, that's Maputo, and that is in Mozambique, and that's also one of our sister cities in terms of subtropical environments, in which both you see one here as a floor plan of a plaza in Havana, and then the other one is in Maputo. So you see this idea of the continuous public arcades, which protect the pedestrians from the sun. Doesn't have to be columns. It can just be overhangs. that make that happen. But you don't have to do it on any side of the street really, except for that which faces the direction of the sun, which would be facing south for us, and for Buenos Aires would be facing north. This is an idea which I saw in Brisbane, which I called like an outdoor catch the breeze room. Maybe there's a way in which you can actually stick something out into the breeze in order to create a kind of pleasant space. These are in Brisbane and Miami Beach. So how do you cover the street itself to protect the pedestrians from the extra heat? What about the covered streets? Naha, Japan, another one of our sister cities, which is I'm forgetting the name of the island to the south right now, sorry. So that the covered street, again, provide, if of course, if appropriately directed, can keep the breeze moving through the space, but breaks off that sun. And of course, one of the simplest ones is the under the tree courtyards. So these are just basically big trees, which provide that cooling, refreshing attributes. You can also, you don't need to use such wide streets if what you need to do is to make narrow, especially pedestrian streets, like Lincoln Road. For the building itself, you can direct the air to, do high-rise ventilating. So there is a large space in the center, or small spaces within the center, which allow the heat to rise out of the city itself and actually suck cooler air from the ground level up into that space. High-rise venting, Ken Yang's work in Malaysia. You can use short stopping streets to provide a space which is, tighter and shaded, but generally you need to find a place for the air to go. So you still need to vent these streets in some ways. So here are some vented streets, and I'm going to show you this kind of, this is in North Beach, which has the space between the buildings. I don't think is really quite wide enough to be successful. But this one in Spain, you can see the idea they didn't want to have people coming in from that direction in the development, but they did provide the opportunity for air to leave, which then therefore allows the air to move through the space. Open courtyards at the bases. You can see the drawings in the upper right-hand corner, which have to do with the proportions of the buildings to the courtyard space, and what you generally need to have in terms of then that courtyard space. If it doesn't have any breezeways at the bottom, right, that'll allow the air to kind of not jump over the buildings, but get inside the space to provide it. Here's the big tree, which in this particular exercise for everyone, they had to do a big tree space. This is Michael Sorkin again. He actually did a number of big tree ideas, including just doing kind of big tree traffic blockers in Brooklyn. And then I'm going to stop there. Okay. I hope it doesn't keep going. Yes, this is Australia. Just, this is just silliness for my presentation of koalas and kangaroos. When I went there, I did pet the kangaroos. How can you avoid it, right? Flightless birds. And then our friends here from South Florida, but also around the world. You might recognize the plants because they're just like our plants. You can even see here this common vine growing up the tree. Palms, could be Florida. There is the eucalyptus, which they use, is a little bit drier. You see that, but actually I've seen it in South Florida also. You can see the plants, the residential plants, completely similar to what might happen here. Just to remind you that we really do share an environment with them in Australia. This is a botanical garden, so this African tree is here for people's enjoyment. I think the tabebuia is in bloom right now here in Florida. And so here are some principles. Shade everything. This is actually a tree they're protecting, is a strange tree, but that they found only a few left in the world, and they're protecting it here, but they're shading it. Just a little place, you know, off an office building to have lunch, shade where people sleep, sit. Doesn't have to be 100% solid. They have several of these in Brisbane, these kind of planted walked arcades, using as an architectural element. You'll see that later again, just down at the beach. What's that pattern in relationship to the form? It's kind of waving through the structural elements. The patterns that make in the street. So you're also thinking about its architectural implications in addition to its comfort for the people being there. Downtown Brisbane. Many of the shopping malls or shopping centers have shaded car parks like this outside. So now we see kind of a bigger use of shaded elements of shading, I guess in this case facing north, because Brisbane is in the southern hemisphere. You can see that earlier element now on the side of the building. So they've come to make it part of their architectural vocabulary now. Even older vocabulary, it actually shades the window. You can see the horizontal wooden screen coming down in front of the windows, and then the funny T-shaped shade forms. Giant blinds, you might say. Smaller versions, but still large. Architectural detail made entirely in which to help block the sun. This is probably an east and west facade rather than a northern facade. Here you see them as because you don't have to 100% protect everything in the building in order to help with the situation. Especially the sidewalks. They like black in Brisbane, I noticed. So here what we're looking at is we're looking for all the devices, both in the buildings from the 19th century and in the contemporary century. You can see them continuing to add that. Probably that canopy was added to the historic building. Of course, it also has the possibility of being an advertising vehicle, which is fine. People to find where they want to go. Could be freestanding as this is. It's not connected to the building because it is a bus shelter. Again, using these, which are everywhere. It also rains like here also, so that helps. Trying to make sure that you still can have green in the city. Then using the trees themselves to overhang the pathways. And then one thing I noticed in Brisbane is they are very creative in their streetscape design, especially in relation to the plants, rather than the every 20 feet or whatever it is, where you have to have a tree. And so the developers just come in and do that. They actually design kind of places in the streets themselves and kind of gang up plants rather than just make them a mathematical formulation. Or in this case, you can hang the plants. The trees are on the level of the arcade, not on the level of the street. This must have some reason to have that big bug. This was a special street that they had just finished designing and rebuilding, I mean, which had public art in it, this spaceship thing. But you can start to see the way they're not rigid in terms of the tree, in terms of the plantings and how those plantings are arranged. right? So now we have 3 different kinds of trees in the same plant bed. When was the last time you saw that in South Florida? Like never, especially in an urban environment. Here, sometimes it's in a planting bed, sometimes it's just in a grate. Right? Use the plants to, in that case, it's like to use the plants to also kind of make the space for the seat. These, I assume, will get bigger someday. A little bit of art on the concrete wall. Some of their art. Then here you can see also and then using it in diverse ways so people can move in and out of the street. So that's also an interesting thing. You can be on the sidewalk, then you say, oh, I think I'll go through this little space, or rather than the sidewalk. So those transformations are possible. You can see it here again. Using the shade structure as a primary architectural element and the entranceway and to cross through from one street to the other. And that's not coming to life. Now with these, we have the bus shelter. This is a rather large structure. I think it's kind of interesting as to put it up like nearly 20 feet in the air. Here they're utilizing it as a grow device for vines, which eventually I presume will cover the entire top. You can see it here down the side where they have utilized it as part of their sense of the aesthetic of the building itself. So you have a kind of a low one, then a high one, then so each level becomes a possibility in which to establish a kind of beauty in the cityscape. I don't know why I have this picture. Oh, I think because it's called the arbor, the tree. Again, another one of these. So some of this has to do with site layout. One of the things that's interesting about Brisbane is I did meet with the planning people, and they have a lot more control than in the United States in terms of saying what the parameters are that the building needs to meet in terms of environmental concerns and design concerns. So here you are, making the space in between, putting trees within that space. Hopefully those little pathetic palms will fill out over time, in which to let the air flow into the center space and also to cool that air down a little bit. You can see again that these multiple blocks, also doing that trick on the corner there where you see the balconies are open on both sides, so the air moves through that, and that probably makes those spaces very comfortable to sit out in on the balcony. We did a tour of this particular development. Here they created the green breeze channel through the development so that there's extra space for the winds to move across the green space. Just a little thing, some art. Again, the green spaces. You can see the heavy white overhangs, the side elements. So everything pops out all the time. They're always popping out with the design. There are those little funny balls on the side, which is an art project, which I thought was fun because you can actually come out on the deck, but also it's kind of relatively inexpensive in terms of its construction. This is a outdoor performance space. Again, in which the design of the shade structure is the primary aesthetic. Here we have the space in between, in which the vision of the void, the negative space with the curving rooftop, makes you accentuate that particular space moving through. So here we see this combination of air moving through both underneath the pilotis into the space, but also cutting the corner through these exterior spaces, which also would keep those in breeze mode most of the day. combination of, so people can choose where they want to go, but again, enhancing the air at the ground level. Here again, you can see that continuous idea of these overhangs and how they make an aesthetic. These are some shopping districts. And I show these because these are, again, these are pedestrian shopping districts in an urban environment, and you see them again splitting the buildings, splitting the ground level. Using the overhang, so you have one thing which is the ground level, but then you have overhangs, but then the ground level is also manipulated because of the use of pilotis or arcades. This would probably be one, if you can catch a corner in exactly the right way, you can pretty much guarantee a breeze for your customers almost all the time. If you know where the air is coming from and how it actually has to move faster, like around an airplane wing, sometimes to get around a corner to keep moving. And so if you cut the corner off just a little bit, it will actually create, this kind of wind acceleration in the space. All these things, in order for you to learn them, there's only one way, and that's to be conscious all the time about what is going on in the public space out there in general. This is something we've seen here too. It's across the street, kind of the open air bar to the both part of the street and part of the building itself. I think that might, here we have a larger shaded structure, indoor space. These are in the urban environments. I mean, not, you can see the super urban beyond, but this is still very urban. But nothing's perfect. Again, you can see the multiplicity. And one of the things that they are very concerned about in Australia is where the water goes. It's like for us, except they kind of turn it into something rather than are just, open green pits with a chain link fence around them sometimes, which I don't understand why we don't create that each of those pits still has the capability to, at least say 15% of the area can be tree trunks, which are not part of the calculation. I'm sure no one understood that, but that's all right. Here we are, another cut through. This was a nice space. First, I went there at night, outdoor at night, indoor and outdoor. Designing, this is kind of multi-use of the space so that the space does not become just for traffic, but makes it clear that it's both pedestrian and traffic and parking. Here's that same space now during the day. See, and they don't cut all the light out. I think that's very important, where there is this kind of intensity to have bright light come down through into various spaces. Well, now it's a cloudy day, so who knows? Some more art. Again, the use of the so the air can move down at the ground level, but then also the use of the balconies and then the shade structures on top, pretty consistent. Okay, let's see if I have anything else that's particularly interesting. Mid-rise zone parks. So this is kind of mid-rise buildings. Oops, and now we're going to see, this is a really pretty development. See the sun breaks in brown. This was a more urban space, was the park with apartment buildings overhanging. I mean, as a wall. Again, see all this use of the floor slab and the walls as a primary aesthetic. You can see the diversity of scale, which they tend to build in, which I think we've noticed before. I like the moss garden. You know, even our water retention areas that are water, why can't they be like this? They do have hurricanes, but they don't have them nearly as much as we do. Aboriginal design. With this easy trick, which I thought, God, I should use that. You just pour the concrete and then you go out there with a sandblaster and just cut through. And then then you've kind of created the pattern. Smaller buildings. Beautiful amenity. Not so beautiful. This is a single family housing development. You can see this is, I saw a few of these where where the road and the driveway is more treated as one surface. And things are very closer to the street. You can see even little awnings here, overhangs. Better density of plant material. They like this curb a lot rather than our curb, but to do a curb that takes the water somewhere. You might notice that there's, no lawn here. That's what they're also, well, as if they're using it as a special feature. I thought I put this in here just because I can't believe they made a town called Seaside, like one in Florida, and it's kind of like Seaside, except not. So that's enough of that. Green tricks, they use the big tree, filtered sun. Climbing things for trees, leaving the space just for that plant. These are shelters that are also solar collectors. I mean, now that things are cheaper, this is 20 years ago. This is a much more easier thing. How do you deal with the water? Do you express the water when you take it off the roof into an architectural expression? Again, do you make this multiple sequences of shaded spaces? I can't remember the name of this plant, but they love to put it there, which is someplace in a shaded area, where that's a very small version of it. I'm sure you know what I'm seeing. It does a little bit here. Here it is bigger. Oh, called not a horseshoe, horsetail. No, that's not right either. Sorry. Here you can see especially in some areas, they have a huge amount of green roofs. This is a green roof over an underground parking deck. Here's the underground parking deck now, another green roof. Just using tensile structures in which to grow the vines on the building. Very simple system. Using snake plants, but using them in a shaded area, but very densely. I don't see that too often. Be very easy to do. And this is especially two architects I talked to, this idea of also that the curb is designed to get the water into just kind of generic grassy areas without that much being a retention. But you can see the other side has the high going up, so the water comes across and then the water goes into the grass. So using both kinds. There's a million of solar access. And so I think that's it. Except unless you want to see